Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Las Beauty Queens, Stories by Iván Monalisa Ojeda, introduction by Pedro Almodóvar, translated by Hannah Codders, narrated by Luis Chavez. Introduction. This story collection may sound like a book about transvestites and queer people, and that's what it is. But it's more than just that. Monalisa is Chilean, and in these stories she narrates the day-to-day, or rather the night-to-night, of a group of Latinx transgender people and transvestites who work the streets prostituting themselves in bars and in not-to-be-recommended back alleys in New York City. The American dream, seen from the height of a good pair of heels, turns into a nightmare, an everyday nightmare. For these beauty queens, violent death comes with the territory. These stories could be very sordid, but Iván Monalisa has the talent to endow her characters with vitality and grace. She tells you about their misery as something inevitable, but with humor and without turning them into victims. These are stories of survival in the face of Trump's immigration policies, with characters who skirt urban dangers with humor and solidarity. They share drugs, pimps, beauty contest awards, illness, and delirium, but they are a very close-knit community. They remind me of my mother's neighbors, when she went to live back in her hometown during her final years. Her neighbors took care of her much better than we would have. The solidarity and care among the widows who lived on my mother's street is one of the most beautiful things I remember of my hometown. It is not strange that Julieta Serrano told her son that she didn't want him to include her neighbors in his films. Neighbors are sacred, in the full meaning of that word. They're not entirely similar, but Las Beauty Queens reminds me of my book of stories about Patti Diffusa. They show very different human landscapes and social surroundings. Mine is all hedonist fiction, while the stories in Las Beauty Queens radiate realism in every sentence. Pedro Almodóvar. Overdose. Night falls. I haven't slept in 3 days. My pupils are dilated and my eyes are red. Sprawled out on the bed, almost motionless, I'm convinced my body smells of ether. When I turn out the lights in my room, everything falls into shadows. Little by little, piles of clothing start to take human shape. Immobile forms everywhere I turn. As night draws on, they look more and more like the silhouettes of people. It must be the effect of not having closed my eyes in days. It's the middle of summer, and the room I'm renting is on the 3rd floor on a house in the Bronx. A house made of wood that holds in all the heat. I don't have air conditioning, and the fan does nothing to regulate the rising temperature of my body. I sweat something that smells like chemicals and artificial sweetener. I have a big bottle of water next to my bed, but I can't bring myself to move, not even to reach for a drink. It doesn't matter that I haven't had a drop of water in over 10 hours. My intestines feel all crunchy because my stomach is empty, but I'm not hungry. I have enough money to order delivery, but something keeps me from picking up the phone. I can't let anyone hear my voice. The last time I made a call on my cell, my friend asked what was going on, why my voice sounded all metallic, like I was calling from beyond the grave. Calling 911 isn't an option. I know from experience that nothing good can come of it. First, they'll cart me off to the emergency room, and then straight to the psych ward at Bellevue. I pick up the rosary just as I always have since the age of 10 whenever I feel rage or fear coming on. I try to pray, but I don't have the patience. I barely make it through 7 Ave Marias. I get used to the dark. I can distinguish between objects, but I can't let my eyes focus on anything in particular. I know that if I do, I'll see someone. Without wanting to, I look towards the closet. The door's cracked open. I make out a pair of shoes, and then, all of a sudden, the shoes are attached to a pair of legs. There's someone inside my closet. I can see him clearly. He has long legs. I sit up in bed and whisper to him to leave me alone. Then I see my silk kimono shining in the semi-darkness. It's draped over a suitcase. In a second, it transforms before my eyes into the silhouette of a woman who is face down, kneeling. I can't bear to look at her face. I squeeze my eyes shut. I lie back down on the bed, which is damp and has a sweet smell. I take a deep breath and decide to start opening my eyes very, very slowly. On the opposite end of the bed, just beyond my feet, the only window in the room opens onto a giant tree that must be over a century old. A faint wind rustles its branches. Little by little, the swaying starts to accelerate, and I hear what sounds like voices repeating an unintelligible mantra. I close my eyes again and try to breathe deeply. Something tells me it's all in my head, or it must be the effect of so many sleepless nights. I try to snap out of it. I look for the bottle of water at the foot of my bed. I'm not thirsty, but I know I should drink something. I feel better. Better than I felt in many hours. I promise myself this really will be the last time. I pull the glass pipe out from under my pillow and open the little plastic bag of crystal meth. I empty some of it into the pipe. I take the lighter and begin heating up the glass bulb. When I see the white smoke building up in the center of the bulb, I take a long hit. I repeat this 4 times. I wait for the pipe to cool down and put it back under the pillow. I lie face up on the bed. I think of the time I told a friend that whenever I'm high on crystal meth and haven't slept for a few days, I start seeing human forms. This isn't the first time. My friend said they must be the ghosts of people who overdosed, looking me straight in the eye. She warned me never to talk to the shadows, never to make any kind of contact with them. I should ignore them. It was for my own good, she said. I close my eyes and try to get them out of my head. But suddenly, everything starts spinning very slowly, in a way that feels almost pleasant. Until, just as suddenly, everything falls still. I muster the courage to sit down on the edge of the bed. I open my eyes and look towards the closet with the open doors. There are shoes, which now connect to a pair of legs and the shadow of a man. I whisper to him without fear. I tell him this can't be real, that what I'm seeing is no ghost. I ask if he's really there, but the shadow doesn't reply. I say it over and over again until I hear a voice saying, "No, none of us are dead. We are only shadows." I turn my head to see who's speaking. My kimono is still being worn by the woman who, just a moment ago, was kneeling face down. Now she's raised her head. I can't help but stare. She tells me not to worry, not to be afraid. She tells me to lie down and try to close my eyes. It's time to rest. They'll watch over me as I dream. And then the voices disappear, and with them go all the colors. In the bote. The police had stopped me on multiple occasions. The last time was around 2 months before what I'm about to tell you. After leaving the bar, if I hadn't made enough money, I'd go walking along 14th Street towards 9th Avenue. My friend Lamaru lived close by in the Chelsea projects. That's where I'd change from him into her, or from her into him. So, taco, taquito, tacon, iris, chacon. I'd wait to see if anything happened, if any cars showed up. Can you give me a ride? If they said yes, I'd get in. And even if I couldn't get any money out of them, they'd at least give me a ride. The most they'd do was try to touch my legs on the way. I'd ask them if they wanted anything more. If they wanted to play, they should at least leave me a tip. If they said no, pues okay, babe, thanks for the ride. Leave me here. One of those nights, almost at the end of the fall, I was doing shows at the bar downtown, one of the many runs by the legendary Sandy Michel. I had to play Bette Midler, so songs like I'm Beautiful or One Monkey Don't Stop No Show were part of my repertoire. They paid me $50 and gave me open bar. Of course, I always ended up drunk. As on many other nights, I walked along 14th Street to 9th Avenue. As I started to cross 8th Avenue, a car pulled up next to me. The window on the driver's side rolled down and a 60-something man appeared. He had pink cheeks and a full white beard. Hi, babe. What's up? Want to get in? I stood there looking at him. Despite his appearance, and even though Christmas was fast approaching, he obviously wasn't Santa Claus. I thought in silence about his red snapper face on the streets of New York. Can you give me a ride? Sure, babe. Hop in. There's money here, I thought, as I climbed in. We had even made it half a block when a patrol car stopped us. 2 officers told me to get out and handcuffed me without another word. I tried to justify myself, saying I just asked them for a ride, but I was already prepared to get into the police car. The officers went over to talk to my alleged driver. Turns out, Santa Claus was undercover, a plainclothes cop. It went the same as always, the same as so many times before. They took me to the police station on 14th Street in New York's 6th Precinct. When they loaded me into the van, it was almost full already. Nothing out of the ordinary, since it was almost 5 in the morning. The last time an undercover cop caught me, I was the first one in the van. It wasn't even 10 at night, so I had to wait for more than 4 hours for the van to fill up. One by one, they picked out my colleagues, girls they arrested at the exits of strip clubs or who worked in bars. Lots of them had gone over to the undercover cops, giving them the whole sexy fool act. Babe, do you want a lap dance? They'd leave with what they thought was a John, and right there in the middle of the street, the police would be waiting. They'd put her in handcuffs and load her straight up into the van. But this time, I was the last person aboard the ship. No waiting, straight to the precinct. Nothing left to do but kill time until they took you to be sentenced. The first time they arrest you for prostitution, the sentence is to attend a class on safe sex, followed by another on the use of narcotics. When they catch you a second time, they start giving you days of community service. 2 days cleaning a park or putting stamps on mail at the NYPD offices. The more times they catch you, the more days of community service you get. Once, my friend Miriam Hernandez from El Salvador had to do a whole month of community service. I saw all this coming, but there was still something about it that surprised me. A few years before that night, in 2000 to be exact, I decided to walk the streets more. Years of hardcore hustling. I always made money, or at least got a ride up to Washington Heights, where I lived at the time. From the center of the action down to 14th Street, all the way uptown was a long way, but the cars would hop on the West Side Highway and get there in a flash. I walked the streets at least 3 days a week, or should I say, 3 nights. Hustling on 14th Street in those years was like being right in the lion's den, or rather, in the police's den, because they're one and the same. They were always out patrolling. They knew everything that went on and would arrest you if they felt like it. They were always there, always on the prowl. After the first month, when those bohemian cobblestone streets finally felt familiar under my heels, just when I'd learned to walk on them almost effortlessly, I started getting caught. They arrested me 5 times in 3 months. Sometimes they'd catch me when I was inside the car, just as the John on call was handing me the cash. Other times, they'd arrest me for just being in the area. You should thank us. We were waiting for you to make your money. That hypocrite of a Lieutenant Torres said to me once. He was in charge of arresting all the sex workers he found walking around his territory. Once, he arrested me just for talking to a man I had asked for the time. 3 patrol cars pulled up in front of me. With all the paraphernalia and the commotion, I thought they must have confused me with some high-risk criminal. 6 police officers must have gotten out. I was cornered like a stray cat, blinded by the lights, and somewhat stunned by the sound of the sirens. I'd never felt so important. It happened so many times, and I got so many sentences of community service that, after a while, I started forgetting about the days when I was supposed to be cleaning parks or sweeping streets, and even the days when I had hearings with the judge. To get myself out of all of this, I decided not to go back to hooking on the streets. From then on, I'd only work in bars. Case closed, I thought. I didn't know back then and wouldn't know now until this arrest that your absences from community service or hearings turn into guarantees. This means if the police arrest you again, you go straight to jail. To Rikers Island, I mean. Or Las Rocas. The Rocks, as Latinos call it. Normally, I'd wait anxiously for the moment when I'd go to court to see the judge, but this time, I wanted the time to pass slowly. I just had this feeling. Maybe that's why I came up with the brilliant idea of giving them a different name from the one I'd used before. The first time they'd arrested me, a loca in the van gave me some advice. I should never use my real name. The best thing was to say you were Puerto Rican. That way, no one would bother to check if you were legal or illegal. Boricuas are citizens, and when it came to my social security number, I should say I'd forgotten it, obviously. The police think we're all on drugs and have no idea what's going on around us. That's why, since my first arrest, I'd been calling myself Juan Cruz. Why Juan? Why Cruz? Beats me. This time, on my way to the courthouse in Midtown, handcuffed in the back of a van, I decided to call myself Luis Rivera. What could be more Puerto Rican than Luis? What was more Boricua than Rivera? But as soon as I got to the courthouse, everything turned against me from the moment they took my fingerprints. They didn't use ink anymore. That horrible stain that stayed on your fingers for days as a reminder. Te arrestaron por puta. They arrested you for being a whore. Well, not anymore. Gone were the days of ink pads. We were in a new millennium. Now, you had to press the tips of your fingers to a screen that recorded your prints digitally. Name? The officer asked me. Luis Rivera, I answered confidently. I waited to see some kind of reaction on his face as he entered my name, for him to realize that the names didn't match up. I thought he must be used to lying delinquents because that reaction never came. Once all the paperwork was done, they returned me to a cell in the courthouse and I waited to be seen by a judge. After a few minutes, the attorney who was going to represent me arrived, a 50-something white man. He sat down across from me and started to read my record. He murmured as he read my criminal history. Are you Mr. Cruz or Mr. Rivera? Back then, people didn't have the delicacy to ask you for your preferred pronouns, so his Mr. sounded dry and direct. Call me whatever you like. I'm both, I answered with a smirk. He gave me a look that wasn't quite a smile. He needed to maintain his composure. I see that your only arrests have been for prostitution. Let's hope the judge will be benevolent with his sentence. As soon as he said this, he looked back over my record and let out an exclamation. Yes? I said, nervous. It says here you didn't show up for your community service twice, and on another occasion you missed your hearing with the judge, a hearing you requested yourself as you were pleading not guilty. The judge threw you a bone by giving you another court date to prove you were innocent, and you didn't show up? I know. This means you now have 3 guarantees. A guarantee signifies lack of respect for the law, but like I was saying, you've only been arrested for prostitution. No violent crime or anything like that. I'll see you in just a moment. He stood up, gave me a serious look, and left. I waited for my turn to go in for my hearing, praying I'd have good luck with the judge. Then a police officer appeared and escorted me to the courtroom. They opened the door. I heard a voice say, "Juan Cruz, also known as Luis Rivera?" That was me. Juan Cruz, also known as Luis Rivera. What a criminal you are, loca, I thought to myself. You even have an alias. They took off my handcuffs and set me down next to the attorney. I felt him looking at me with a restrained smile. It wasn't enough to promise the judge I'd do all the community service he wanted. The judge, who had a face like a friendless dog, wouldn't let his arm be twisted. He gave me 3 months in Las Rocas, and at the end of February, another hearing, or 5,000 for bail. That was the irrevocable sentence. From the courthouse, they took me to Central Booking, also known as the Tombs, because it was located in a sort of basement under another, bigger courthouse in Chinatown. Calling it a tomb seemed accurate. It never saw the light of day. I was in a cell there for hours, until I heard the call that I would hear repeated so many times. Juan Cruz, also known as Luis Rivera. I stood up. An officer took me down a long hall that led outside, where a bus with bars at the windows was waiting for me. I climbed into that jail cell on heels, which was full in less than 15 minutes. I looked around at my travel companions. I saw frustrated expressions all over the place, but I also saw so many faces of guys who were used to all this. An armored door separated us from the driver. We were all handcuffed. I felt the buzz of motors and far-off voices. Through the window, I could see several identical buses approaching ours. Armored buses that transported the creme de la creme from every county in New York City, Staten Island, Queens, the Bronx, Brooklyn, and of course, Manhattan were represented among those who washed up. They made us climb out and go into one of the 2 stations in front of us. They were made of cement-colored bricks. Men came and went, all in gray or orange jumpsuits. Of the people who passed me, 80% were prisoners. The rest, guards and police officers. I don't know how so few people can control so many. They put me in a line. Almost 3 days had passed since I got arrested because of that fucking Santa Claus. My makeup had worn off, with the exception of my waterproof mascara. I hadn't spent those $10 in vain. The rest of the makeup I'd stolen, of course. 3 days without showering, 3 days without shaving. In sum, I was a bewigged queen who looked like Freddy Krueger. I waited my turn. An inmate crossed in front of me. I was shocked by the color of his skin, a complexion so white it must have not seen the sun in years. Skin that almost became transparent under the lights of the shed. Then, it was my turn. They made me go into a big room that looked like the bathroom of a dilapidated athletic center. They told me to take my clothes off. The wig was the first thing I took off. Next came my shoes and everything else. I couldn't believe I'd been wearing heels the whole time. Until that moment, I hadn't even noticed. They put all my things into a big paper bag. When I was ready to get in the shower, the inmates who had been there for a long time and were in charge of these procedures started to play with my nipples, which were hard because of my sporadic experiences with female hormones and how cold it was in that place. To one of them, who was pretty handsome, I might add, I gave a look like, touch whatever you want, babe. We smiled at each other, and before I could start to dream that he was my husband in there, the time came for me to get in the shower. I had just 3 minutes. Those had to be the 3 most enjoyable minutes of the last few days. I had to put on the orange uniform and matching slip-ons. All of us were silent, tired. A long vacation at Rikers Island Resort awaited us. After the shower, they drove us to another building, the one that housed the dormitories. It was a spacious place, with around 50 or 60 beds. There was a guard in a barred cubicle with a window looking onto the dormitory. He communicated with inmates through the window. I just entered when someone came up to me. He was a white man with a brown beard around my height. He said hello and welcomed me. Surprised, I said hi back. I sensed a Latino accent, so I asked where he was from, and because I'd had enough of lying about my origins, I answered him. I'm from Chile, from the south of South America. Oh, a Chilean one, he exclaimed. There's another guy from Chile here. Do you want me to introduce you? No, please, I don't want to meet any Chilean guys. I came here for my country a long time ago, and honestly, I'm not in the mood for Chileans, now less than ever. I just finished my sentence when they announced lights out. Time for bed. I hadn't had any time to get settled, so I lay down in the first empty bed I could find. I threw myself down and with no blanket to warm me, started to shiver from the cold. In complete darkness, I asked my neighbors in the next beds over for something to keep me warm. Someone told me to ask the guard in the cubicle, so I, rather sure of myself, called out into the darkness. Guard? Please, I need a blanket. Who's talking? Juan Cruz, also known as Luis Rivera. I need something to keep warm. It's the end of my shift. I'll let the next guard know. Thank you, sir, I replied, getting used to my surroundings. I lay shivering from the cold. Suddenly, I heard a voice. Hey, did you just get here? Yes, it's my first time. Here, take this. He tossed over something heavy and furry that fell on top of me. I could barely see my neighbor in the darkness of the dorm. I wrapped myself up in the blanket. As I was beginning to fall asleep, I heard, Where's Juan Cruz? Right here. Do you need a blanket? No, thanks. Somebody gave me one. He'd probably seen on my records that I was a lady of the night, along with the photo in my file and the reason for my arrest. Loudly he said, I see how it is. Traded it for a blowjob, right? The silence suddenly erupted into shouts of mockery, contempt, and shock. I didn't have the energy to think or react. I fell asleep. All of a sudden, I sensed voices and movement. Light invaded the space. I was so tired that everyone, or almost everyone, had gotten up before me. I sat up in the bed and tried to find the face of the person who'd welcome me. My bed was in the middle of so many beds. I was in the middle of so many people. Lots of them were walking in the same direction, towards the bathroom, I assumed. I spotted my neighbor. He was walking in my direction. I greeted him enthusiastically as he walked by. He looked over and immediately looked away. He walked right by me. Before I let myself feel too surprised by his reaction, I remembered what happened the night before. Everyone knew that a loca had arrived. I went over to the guard station, which now had a woman in it. I asked her for a towel. Without looking at me, she handed me one along with a small bar of soap. An African-American man gave me a shove with his shoulder. Oh, tough guy, get out of my way. I looked all around me. The showers were empty. I was on high alert. I showered quickly. I didn't even use soap. I returned to my bed. I threw myself onto it. It was my territory, the only place where I could feel safe and, dare I say it, protected. In the adjoining room, they switched on a huge TV mounted on the ceiling. A group of Chinese men were playing chess. I sat up and walked over to them, miming, "Hey, let's play." But they too ignored me. Then an announcement came over the loudspeaker.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?